The bedroom door flew open so hard that it slammed against the wall.
Still wearing that old thing?
Isadora Ashcroft swept into the room like a queen returning from a victory parade. Her gown shimmered as she walked, and she deliberately lifted her left hand, letting the enormous sapphire engagement ring catch the morning sunlight.
Lavinia, guess who's going to become Lady Ashcombe?
The moment her eyes found the ring, genuine happiness brightened her weary face.
Oh, you are engaged. Yes, I have.
Isadora laughed, spinning once before the mirror.
Lord Tristram proposed yesterday.
Without hesitation, Lavinia put down her sewing and embraced her little sister.
I truly hope he gives you a lifetime of happiness.
Isadora accepted the embrace for only a second before stepping back. He will. She admired the ring again before slowly looking Lavinia up and down.
After all, I'm the one getting married while you're still waiting.
The words lingered between them.
I'm happy for you. I know you are. But you have to admit, it's rather embarrassing. What is? Being the younger sister who's getting married first. People always whisper when that happens. I've already heard Aunt Beatrice wondering whether gentlemen avoid you because you're too proud or because they simply don't notice you.
Lavinia lowered her eyes to the dress she had in her hands.
I suppose people will always find something to talk about. Oh, don't worry. I'll make sure they have something much happier to discuss after my wedding.
Before Lavinia could answer, the door opened again. Lady Drusilla Ashcroft entered carrying a thick bundle of papers tied with ribbon.
There you are.
Without so much as congratulating either daughter, she placed the heavy stack into Lavinia's arms.
The guest list, seating arrangements, musicians, flowers, the wedding breakfast, accommodation for Lord Tristram's relatives, the chapel decorations, and don't forget the final dress fittings. Everything needs to be perfect. I hope I made myself clear.
The pile was so heavy that Lavinia nearly lost her balance.
I'll begin immediately.
Drusilla studied her face.
What is that expression?
I don't understand. You look unhappy. I'm not. No? Then don't let jealousy ruin your sister's happiness.
Lavinia stared at her.
Of course. You've watched your younger sister receive everything you failed to achieve. I won't have bitterness casting a shadow over this wedding.
Lavinia's lips parted. No words came. She simply lowered her eyes.
I'll make sure everything is perfect. I expect nothing less.
Isadora smiled triumphantly.
I told you, Mother. No one organizes a wedding better than Lavinia.
The two women walked out together, their laughter echoing down the corridor. Silence filled the room. Only then did Lavinia notice her father. Lord Gideon Ashcroft sat motionless in his wheelchair beside the window. He had witnessed every word. His hands gripped the wooden armrests until his knuckles turned white. His lips trembled as though he wanted to defend his daughter, but guilt had stolen his voice long before illness had stolen his legs. Lavinia forced a gentle smile.
It's all right, Father. I'll take care of everything.
She quietly left the room. Gideon watched the door close. A tear rolled silently down his cheek. He whispered to the empty room,
"Forgive me, my daughter."
Welcome to Duke and Duchess, where unforgettable stories of love, sacrifice, betrayal, and justice come to life. Before we continue, please support the channel by liking this video, subscribing if you're new, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's go back 12 years and discover how one father's heroic act unintentionally stole the brightest years of his daughter's life. 12 years earlier. Long before sacrifice became part of her daily life, Ashcroft Manor was known as one of the most respected estates in the county. The gardens bloomed in perfect rows, the fountains sparkled beneath the afternoon sun, and servants carried out their duties with cheerful confidence. Laughter drifted through the halls instead of whispered worries, and every room reflected a family that believed tomorrow would be brighter than today. 17-year-old Lady Lavinia Ashcroft crossed the courtyard carrying a small stack of books. Unlike many young noble women, she was just as comfortable discussing estate accounts as she was reading poetry. Her curiosity often surprised visiting nobles, but it always made her father smile. Lord Gideon Ashcroft waited beside the stables, studying several maps spread across a wooden table.
There you are. Come and tell me which field you think should be planted first next season.
Lavinia studied the maps carefully before pointing toward the eastern farmland.
The soil recovered well after last year's harvest. If we rotate the crops properly, we'll have a stronger yield.
Exactly.
He folded the maps and looked at his daughter. Many fathers teach their sons to manage an estate, he smiled. I prefer teaching the child who actually enjoys learning. Lavinia laughed softly.
I hope I never disappoint you.
You never could, my dear. You are my greatest joy.
Thank you, Father.
Their conversation was interrupted by Amos, who hurried across the courtyard with riding gloves tucked beneath his arm.
If Father is giving away compliments, I should like one before dinner.
Earn one first.
Amos laughed and disappeared toward the stables, leaving everyone smiling. Nearby, Lady Drusilla watched the exchange with quiet satisfaction. The carriage is ready. If we leave now, we'll still arrive before the evening banquet. Within minutes, the family began their journey through the countryside. The road wound between green hills and ancient oak trees, while conversations flowed easily inside the carriage. They spoke about the upcoming social season, neighboring estates, and Lavinia's plans to continue her education later that year. I'd like to see the university library one day, Lavinia admitted. They say it contains books collected from across Europe. You will, Gideon replied without hesitation. The world is much larger than this county, and I want you to see every part of it. Those words settled warmly in her heart. Outside, however, the weather began changing. Dark clouds gathered across the sky. The wind grew stronger. Rain started falling against the carriage windows. The horses became restless. The coachman tightened the reins, but another loud crack of thunder echoed across the hills. The frightened horses suddenly bolted. The carriage lurched violently. One wheel struck a large stone hidden beneath the muddy road. The entire coach tipped sideways. Lavinia lost her balance as the carriage door burst open. She was thrown toward the opening. Everything happened within seconds. Seeing his daughter falling, Gideon launched himself across the carriage without a moment's hesitation. He wrapped both arms around Lavinia and forced her back inside just as the carriage overturned. Wood shattered, glass exploded into countless pieces. The world disappeared beneath noise, rain, and darkness. When Lavinia finally opened her eyes, villagers were pulling broken pieces of the carriage apart. She struggled to sit up. "Father?" No answer came. Moments later, inside Ashcroft Manor, the family physician completed his examination before removing his spectacles with a heavy sigh. He looked toward Lady Drusilla. "My lady, I'm afraid Lord Ashcroft may never walk again." Standing outside the doorway, Lavinia heard every word. Her legs refused to move. The future her father had promised only hours earlier vanished before her eyes. She slowly entered the room and knelt beside his bed. Gently taking his unconscious hand, she fought back tears. In a voice barely louder than a whisper, she made a promise that would shape the next 12 years of her life.
I won't let this family fall apart.
The weeks following the accident changed Ashcroft Manor more than anyone believed possible. The once lively estate slowly surrendered to silence. Lord Gideon remained confined to his bed, unable to move his legs. Physicians arrived almost daily, each bringing expensive medicines and little hope. Every visit emptied another purse of gold, while every disappointing examination deepened the family's despair. The cheerful laughter that had once echoed through the manor disappeared. One by one, servants were dismissed because their wages could no longer be afforded. The stable master left first, followed by 2 gardeners and the housekeeper who had served the Ashcroft family for nearly 20 years. Lavinia watched each farewell with quiet sorrow. She thanked every servant personally, apologizing for circumstances beyond her control. The estate itself began to show signs of neglect. The rose gardens lost their careful shape. Empty fields remained unplanted because there were too few workers. Repairs to the manor were postponed. Inside the drawing room, expensive paintings disappeared from the walls. Silver ornaments vanished from display cabinets. Even treasured family heirlooms quietly found their way into merchants' hands. No one spoke about it. Everyone simply pretended not to notice. Then the creditors began arriving. Each visit left Drusilla more anxious than before. Each letter demanded another payment. Each unpaid bill reminded the family that the future looked increasingly uncertain. One evening, Lavinia stood outside her father's study, listening to the steward explain the estate's finances. "If this continues, my lord," the old steward said carefully, "we may have no choice but to sell part of the western farmland." Lavinia closed her eyes. That land had belonged to the Ashcroft family for generations. She quietly walked away before anyone noticed her listening. The following morning, she made her decision.
Father,
She
I've
entered Gideon's
withdrawn.
room carrying a neatly
Withdrawn?
folded letter.
On what
Her
grounds?
father smiled weakly.
My decision is
"You
final.
should be preparing for
This
school."
affects us all,
Instead, Lavinia placed the letter on the bedside table. "I've withdrawn." Gideon's smile disappeared. "You've what?" "I won't be returning." "No." His voice remained gentle but firm. "No, Lavinia." She sat beside him. "The estate needs someone. It needs a steward. It needs family. It needs its daughter to finish her education." She smiled softly. "My education can wait." "It cannot." He struggled to sit upright. "You've worked too hard for this opportunity." Lavinia reached forward and adjusted his blanket. "You always taught me that duty comes before comfort." "I taught you responsibility. I never taught you to surrender your future." She kissed his forehead. "I'm not surrendering it. I'm only postponing it." Although she sounded confident, even she wasn't certain she believed those words. From that day forward, Lavinia spent every hour beside the estate steward. She learned how to balance ledgers. She negotiated with merchants who were twice her age. She attended meetings with tenant farmers. She listened carefully as lawyers explained contracts and leases. Every evening, she organized medicine schedules for her father before checking household accounts late into the night. Within months, she understood responsibilities that many noblemen never bothered to learn. The elderly steward often watched her with quiet admiration. "You learn quickly, my lady." Lavinia smiled weakly. "I don't have the luxury of learning slowly." Meanwhile, Amos continued living as though nothing had changed. Whenever work needed doing, he found an excuse to disappear. If Gideon asked whether a task had been completed, Amos confidently answered yes. Only Lavinia knew she had quietly finished the work herself before anyone discovered the truth. She protected her brother without expecting thanks. She simply wanted to spare her father unnecessary disappointment. Little Isadora remained blissfully unaware of the family's growing struggles. At night, frightened by thunderstorms or unfamiliar silence, she still climbed into Lavinia's bed. "Second Mama, will father walk again soon?" Lavinia gently stroked her hair. "I hope so." It wasn't the answer Isadora wanted, but it was the only honest one she could give. As autumn turned to winter, an elegant envelope bearing the seal of Lavinia's academy arrived. Her place had been reserved. The headmistress wrote that she could return whenever she was ready. Lavinia read the letter twice. She smiled as memories of classrooms, books, and dreams filled her thoughts. Then she walked quietly to the drawing room. The fire burned brightly inside the stone fireplace. Without hesitation, she placed the letter into the flames. The paper curled slowly before disappearing into ash. She remained standing there until nothing remained. She never noticed Gideon watching from the hallway. His wheelchair had carried him only halfway down the corridor before he stopped. He had seen everything. A tear rolled silently down his face. He realized the promise his daughter had made beside his sickbed was no longer a promise. It had become her life. The following spring, shortly after her 18th birthday, The old steward handed Lavinia the estate ledger. "My lady," he said respectfully, "from today onward, the running of Ashcroft Manor belongs to you." Lavinia accepted the heavy book with steady hands. She looked across the estate, stretching beyond the manor windows. Then she quietly opened the first page and began writing. At only 18 years old, Lady Lavinia Ashcroft became the invisible heart of a family that had no idea how much it would one day depend on her.
8 years slipped away so quietly that no one inside Ashcroft Manor seemed to notice them. Each birthday arrived with little celebration before disappearing into another year of responsibility. Every winter brought higher heating costs and fresh repairs the estate could barely afford.
Lady Lavinia,
Every
the tenants
spring
have arrived.
demanded new planting
I'll see them
schedules.
immediately.
Every summer
Thank you,
ended
my
with
lady.
harvest accounts waiting on Lavinia's desk. Every Christmas found her making certain everyone else received a gift while quietly pretending she had forgotten to buy one for herself. As fashions changed across England, noble ladies filled their wardrobes with elegant new gowns from London. Lavinia continued mending the same dresses she had worn since she was 18. One responsibility slowly became another until nobody questioned who carried the weight of the household. Whenever a servant had a problem, the answer was always the same: ask Lady Lavinia. When tenants arrived with complaints, ask Lady Lavinia. When merchants refused deliveries, ask Lady Lavinia. When Gideon's medicine needed ordering, ask Lady Lavinia. When Amos misplaced important documents, ask Lady Lavinia. When Isadora needed another gown for a dinner or ball, ask Lady Lavinia. The words became so common that people stopped realizing they were asking the same woman to solve every problem. No one thanked her. They simply expected her to manage. Lavinia never complained. She simply continued working. By the time she reached 23, the estate was stable once again. Not prosperous, not wealthy, but surviving. Only a handful of people understood who had made that possible. One of them was Lord Gideon. Every evening he watched his eldest daughter return to his room carrying estate ledgers instead of novels. Her hands no longer belonged to a young noblewoman. They had become rough from years of work. Sometimes, after she left, Gideon stared at the closed door for several minutes, wondering how many dreams had quietly disappeared while she saved his family. Then, during one spring, someone unexpected entered Lavinia's life. His name was Edward Beaumont. He was the younger son of a respectable baron. Unlike many gentlemen, Edward never admired Lavinia because of her appearance or family connections. He admired the way she spoke with tenants as though they mattered. He admired her intelligence during estate discussions. He admired her patience. Whenever they met, their conversations drifted naturally from books to history, from gardens to travel. For the first time in years, Lavinia found herself smiling without forcing it. Edward never hurried her. He visited Ashcroft Manor often under perfectly respectable circumstances. Months passed before he finally requested permission to court her properly. When Gideon heard the request, hope returned to his tired eyes. After Edward left that afternoon, Gideon called Lavinia into his study.
He is a good man.
I know.
You deserve this happiness.
Lavinia looked down at her hands.
I don't know whether I deserve anything anymore.
You deserve far more than this house has ever given you.
For the first time in years, Lavinia allowed herself to imagine another future. One where mornings did not begin with estate accounts. One where she belonged to a family of her own. One where responsibility was shared instead of carried alone. But dreams inside Ashcroft Manor rarely survived for long. A few days later, Drusilla found Lavinia sitting quietly with one of Edward's letters. She recognized the smile on her stepdaughter's face immediately. Without raising her voice, she sat opposite her.
So you're thinking about marriage?
I believe Edward truly cares for me.
I never imagined you capable of such selfishness.
Selfishness!
Yes. Your father threw himself beneath that carriage to save your life. He gave up his leg so you could keep yours. The first thing you want to do is leave him.
I would never abandon father.
No. Then who will manage the estate? Who will negotiate with the tenants? Who will keep the creditors away? Who will organize his medicines? Who will stop Amos from making foolish mistakes? And who will ensure Isadora has the future she deserves? You call yourself grateful, yet you're prepared to walk away from the man who sacrificed everything for you. I never thought you could be so wicked.
A painful silence filled the room. Lavinia felt as though the air had disappeared from the room. That evening, she asked Edward to meet her beneath the old oak tree overlooking the western fields. He smiled as he approached, believing she had finally made her decision. Instead, he found tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry." Edward's smile disappeared. "Lavinia, I cannot marry you." He searched her face. "Is this truly what you want?" She couldn't answer, because it wasn't. Edward understood anyway. He gently took her hand one last time. "I hope one day you choose yourself." Then he climbed into his carriage. Lavinia stood alone as the horses carried him farther down the winding road until he disappeared beyond the hills. She remained there long after the dust had settled. Behind her, Ashcroft Manor stood exactly where it always had, waiting, needing, demanding. Inside, Amos had begun spending evenings in taverns, borrowing money he never repaid. Lavinia quietly settled each debt before Gideon discovered them. Meanwhile, Isadora blossomed into one of the county's most admired young ladies, attending elegant balls in beautiful gowns without ever realizing whose sacrifices had paid for every ribbon, every glove, and every dance. As darkness covered the estate, Lavinia whispered to the empty road,
Perhaps happiness simply wasn't meant for me.
The following spring brought something Ashcroft Manor had not celebrated in years: a proposal. Lord Tristram Ashcombe arrived with his parents on a bright afternoon, carrying a small velvet box and a quiet confidence that immediately impressed everyone who met him.
Isadora. You have my blessing. Thank you, my lord.
Unlike many young noblemen, Tristram possessed neither arrogance nor vanity. He greeted servants politely, listened more than he spoke, and treated even the oldest members of the household with sincere respect. Most importantly, he adored Isadora. To him, she was graceful, charming, and full of life. He had no way of knowing that much of the effortless elegance he admired had been quietly created by another woman. When he asked Lord Gideon for permission to marry Isadora, the old nobleman's eyes filled with tears. "You have my blessing," Gideon said warmly. The engagement was announced that very evening. The manor erupted with excitement. Servants hurried through the corridors carrying trays of wine. Letters were prepared for relatives across the country. Neighbors arrived bearing gifts and congratulations. Amos celebrated louder than anyone.
My little sister is marrying into one of the finest families in the county. This deserves another bottle!
Only one person wasn't celebrating. Lavinia stood quietly beside the fireplace with a notebook already open in her hands. While everyone else saw a wedding, she saw months of work. The church had to be reserved, guest lists prepared, invitations written, musicians hired, flowers ordered, dress fittings arranged, accommodation found for visiting nobles, menus approved, carriages scheduled, budgets balanced. Nothing would happen unless someone made it happen. She already knew who that someone would be. The following morning confirmed her fears.
Everything concerning the wedding is your responsibility.
There are hundreds of guests.
Then begin today.
There are only 4 months. Then don't waste another minute. Without another word, Drusilla stood and left the room. No one questioned her decision. Not Amos, not Isadora. They simply assumed Lavinia would manage. And she did. Every sunrise began with another problem. The florist demanded advance payment. The chapel requested changes to the seating arrangements. One of the musicians accepted another engagement. The seamstress fell ill before the final dress fitting. Several important guests changed their travel dates without warning. Each difficulty landed on Lavinia's desk. Each one disappeared before anyone else noticed. Weeks passed.
The manor transformed into a place of endless movement. Lavinia rarely finished one task before another arrived. One afternoon she was checking the banquet menu while simultaneously correcting invitation cards and calculating carriage routes. She rubbed her tired eyes. For the first time in years, she quietly admitted, "I'm exhausted."
I'm exhausted.
Drusilla happened to hear her. She stopped walking, slowly turned around. "Exhausted?" Lavinia immediately lowered her eyes. "I only meant," Drusilla interrupted, "your sister is preparing for the happiest day of her life." "I know, and your father sacrificed his health to save yours." Lavinia remained silent. Drusilla stepped closer.
A good daughter doesn't complain when her family needs her.
I wasn't complaining.
Be careful, Lavinia.
Drusilla folded her arms. "Be careful, Lavinia." She paused before delivering the words that stayed with Lavinia long after she left the room. A bad child always believes her own burdens are heavier than everyone else's. Lavinia felt the words settle deep inside her heart. She said nothing. She simply returned to work. That night, long after the household had fallen asleep, she sat alone in her bedroom, surrounded by ledgers, invitations, and seating charts. The candle beside her flickered as she stared blankly at the pages. A thought entered her mind that she had spent years trying to ignore. Amos was only a year older than she was, yet no one expected him to solve problems. No one handed him impossible responsibilities. No one reminded him daily about duty. When he made mistakes, they were forgiven. When she grew tired, she was called ungrateful. She closed her eyes. For a brief moment, she wondered, why? Then she pictured her father sitting helplessly in his wheelchair. The question disappeared. She whispered to herself, "I'm doing this for Father." It was the answer she always gave herself. Whether it was true anymore, she no longer knew. The weeks passed quickly. Invitations reached every guest. The church stood ready. The musicians rehearsed. The kitchens prepared supplies. The gardens bloomed exactly as planned. Every detail had been arranged through Lavinia's quiet determination. Late one evening, Gideon wheeled himself slowly through the corridor. Light still glowed beneath the library door. Curious, he pushed it open. Lavinia sat at the long table surrounded by account books. A pen rested loosely in her hand. Her head had fallen onto an open ledger. She had fallen asleep while working. Gideon's heart tightened. He whispered, "My poor girl." Before he could enter, another figure appeared behind him, Drusilla. She looked at the sleeping young woman for a long moment. Without saying a word, she picked up a folded blanket from a nearby chair. Carefully, she draped it across Lavinia's shoulders. For just one instant, her hand hovered over Lavinia's hair. She almost brushed away the loose strands resting across her face. Almost. Instead, she slowly withdrew her hand. Her expression hardened once more. She turned and walked away. Gideon watched her leave before looking back at his sleeping daughter. The shame in his heart had never felt heavier. Outside, church bells echoed across the valley. Morning had arrived. The day of Isadora's wedding had finally come.
Long before the first rays of sunlight reached Ashcroft Manor, Lavinia was already awake. She quietly dressed in a simple working gown and tied her hair neatly behind her head before leaving her room. The corridors were still dark, but she already carried a notebook filled with the day's schedule. The kitchens had to begin preparing breakfast for more than 200 guests. The florist needed final instructions. The musicians required confirmation of the ceremony's timing. The carriages had to be arranged in perfect order. The chapel decorations needed one last inspection. She moved through the manor with calm confidence, solving one problem after another before anyone else even knew they existed. When one of the cooks accidentally burned the morning pastries, Lavinia calmly reorganized the menu. When heavy rain threatened the outdoor reception, she ordered the servants to prepare the ballroom instead. When the seamstress arrived in tears after discovering Isadora's wedding veil had been torn during transport, Lavinia quietly repaired the delicate lace herself. No one noticed. They simply assumed everything would always work.
After making certain every guest room had been prepared, Lavinia entered Isadora's chamber.
Look beautiful.
Her younger sister stood before a
know.
large mirror, surrounded by
Perfect.
bridesmaids. She looked breathtaking. For a brief moment, Lavinia forgot every sleepless night. She smiled warmly. "You look beautiful." Isadora admired her reflection. "I know." Lavinia carefully adjusted her veil and fastened the final pearl button on the back of her gown. "There," she whispered. "Perfect." Without another word, she left to help her father. Lord Gideon struggled to fasten the ceremonial jacket he had once worn proudly. His hands trembled. Lavinia gently knelt before him. Allow me." She carefully straightened his collar before adjusting the medal pinned to his chest.
There will be time to
Gideon
rest
looked at her
tomorrow.
reflection in the mirror. "You should have been resting." She smiled. "There will be time to rest tomorrow." He lowered his eyes. He knew she didn't believe that. Only after every servant had received instructions, only after every guest had arrived, only after every flower had been placed, only after every carriage had been accounted for, did Lavinia finally return to her own room. She slipped into the same faded blue dress she had repaired countless times. There had been no time to buy another. The wedding ceremony unfolded flawlessly. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of the church as Lord Tristram and Isadora exchanged their vows. Every hymn began exactly on time. Every guest found the correct seat. Every arrangement appeared effortless. The congregation praised the beauty of the ceremony. They complimented the decorations, the flowers, the music, the feast waiting at the manor. Not one person asked who had made it possible. At the reception, Lavinia barely sat down before another problem demanded her attention. A guest required different accommodation. A child became ill. One of the musicians broke a violin string. The kitchen needed approval for an additional course. Several noblewomen stopped her as she hurried through the ballroom. "Young lady," one called, "please fetch more tea." Another smiled politely. "I don't believe we've met. Are you one of the household staff?" Lavinia simply nodded. "It will be brought immediately." She never corrected them. She quietly continued working while everyone else celebrated. As evening approached, Amos had consumed far more wine than anyone could count. Laughing loudly, he climbed onto a small platform with a glass raised high. "I have something to say." The room gradually fell silent. He pointed directly toward
Our
Lavinia.
dear elder sister deserves recognition. She has reached 29 years without finding a husband. Perhaps she frightened every gentleman away with account books.
Or perhaps she enjoys organizing other people's weddings too much to have one herself. This time the laughter spread across the ballroom. Lavinia lowered her eyes. She said nothing. Tristram looked uncomfortable. Gideon closed his eyes in shame. Then Isadora rose gracefully from her chair, lifting her crystal glass. "I should also thank my sister." The ballroom became quiet again. Lavinia looked up. Perhaps, just once, she would hear genuine gratitude. Isadora smiled sweetly. "Every family needs someone willing to sacrifice everything." Guests nodded approvingly. "And Lavinia has always been willing to give up her own happiness for ours." Applause filled the room. Many believed the words sounded affectionate. Only Lavinia understood what they truly meant. She wasn't being honored. She was being praised for remaining useful. Unable to bear another moment, she quietly slipped through the ballroom doors into the moonlit gardens. Cool night air filled her lungs. Moments later, she heard the familiar sound of wheelchair wheels rolling across the stone path. Gideon stopped beside her. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, his voice broke.
I destroyed your life.
Lavinia quickly shook her head.
No, Father, I did.
Tears streamed freely down his face.
I saved your body, but I sacrificed your future.
He covered his face with trembling hands.
I watched you give away your education. I watched you lose the only man you ever loved. I watched you become this family's servant while I sat there doing nothing.
You gave me life.
And I stole yours in return. Listen to me. Leave this house.
Father,
No. go and build the life I should have protected.
But I cannot leave.
Neither of them noticed another man walking quietly through the gardens. Duke Cyril Ravenshire had stepped outside seeking a moment of silence after the celebration. Hearing voices, he stopped behind a hedge. He never intended to listen. Yet Gideon's broken confession and Lavinia's gentle forgiveness rooted him to the spot. He had attended countless noble gatherings. He had met women celebrated for their beauty, wit, and fortune. None possessed the quiet strength of the woman standing before him. Without revealing himself, he quietly walked away, but he knew he would never forget her. When Lavinia returned to the ballroom, the celebration was beginning to wind down. Before she had taken 3 steps inside, Drusilla called her name. "Lavinia." She turned. "We still need someone to supervise the servants while the guests depart, prepare tomorrow's inventory, oversee the gift registry, and arrange accommodations for those remaining overnight." Lavinia stared at her. "I've worked since before sunrise." Drusilla frowned. "And? I'm tired."
You are the unmarried daughter. These responsibilities belong to you. If you were living in your husband's house, no one here would ask anything of you.
For the first time in 12 years, something inside Lavinia finally broke. She looked directly at her mother.
You were the one who asked me not to marry.
The room fell silent.
I gave up my education. I gave up the man I loved. I carried this estate. I raised this family. I paid Amos's debts. I planned this wedding, and I gave every year of my youth because you reminded me that Father had sacrificed everything for me.
Her voice trembled.
And now you tell me I'm only expected to work because I'm unmarried. You're simply bitter. You're jealous because today belongs to your sister. No.
She looked around the ballroom, at every familiar face, then spoke with perfect calm.
I'm leaving.
Leaving? After everything we've done for you?
No, Amos. After everything I've done for all of you, it's finally time I did something for myself.
Before dawn broke over Ashcroft Manor the next morning, Lady Lavinia Ashcroft walked through the front gates carrying one small suitcase. She never looked back. For the first time in 12 years, every step she took belonged to her alone. The morning after Isadora's wedding should have been filled with cheerful conversation and satisfied exhaustion. Instead, Ashcroft Manor awakened to confusion. The eastern hallway remained unusually quiet long after sunrise. No servant rang the breakfast bell. The kitchen fires burned late because no one had delivered the morning instructions. Cooks stood waiting, unsure whether the remaining wedding guests preferred breakfast in the dining hall or their private chambers. The head maid searched anxiously through cupboards, unable to find the household schedule that always appeared on her desk before dawn. The steward paced between his office and the library. "The estate ledgers," he muttered. "Where are yesterday's ledgers?" No one knew. In the pantry, the cook held a notebook in one hand and looked around helplessly. "Has anyone seen this week's menu?" A footman shook his head. "I thought Lady Lavinia had already prepared it." "So did I." Within an hour, the same question echoed through every corridor of the manor. "Where is Lady Lavinia?" No one had an answer. Lady Drusilla remained surprisingly calm. She sat in the drawing room, sipping tea as though nothing unusual had happened. "She'll return," she said confidently. "She's probably resting after the wedding." No one dared disagree. By afternoon, the confusion had only grown worse. 2 suppliers arrived at the same hour because their appointments had been scheduled incorrectly. A stable boy forgot to prepare horses for an important delivery. Servants argued over duties that Lavinia normally assigned before breakfast. Small mistakes multiplied until the orderly household no longer resembled itself. Drusilla found herself glancing toward the front gates more often than she intended. Each time carriage wheels sounded in the distance, she instinctively looked up. Each time, someone else arrived, never Lavinia. By evening, she stopped pretending not to notice the growing disorder. On the second morning, she quietly instructed 2 servants to search the neighboring villages. "If you see her," she said with controlled composure, "tell her the household requires her attention." She still refused to admit that she needed her daughter. Instead, she spoke as though Lavinia had simply forgotten an ordinary responsibility. Lord Gideon watched everything in silence. Late that afternoon, he wheeled himself toward Lavinia's bedroom. The door stood slightly open. Inside, everything remained exactly as she had left it. The bed was neatly made. Her dresses hung carefully inside the wardrobe. The room looked less like someone had moved away and more like someone had stepped out for a short walk. His eyes settled on the writing desk. A drawer had been left unlocked. Curious, he opened it. Inside were dozens of neatly tied bundles of papers. Each carried a handwritten label: medicine schedule, estate accounts, servant salaries, monthly repairs, harvest records, birthday reminders, supplier payments, seasonal purchases. His hands trembled as he continued searching. Then he found one final notebook. Across the front, Lavinia had written, "For father." Gideon slowly opened it. Every page contained reminders for his medicines, appointments with the physician, exercises recommended for his back, even notes reminding the servants which blankets he preferred during colder nights. The final page simply read, "If I am ever away, please make sure father never misses his evening medicine." Gideon closed the notebook against his chest. The tears came without warning. "My precious girl," his voice cracked beneath the weight of 12 years of regret. "You even planned how to care for me after you were gone." Across the county, Lord Tristram Ashcombe was beginning the first days of married life with Isadora. On their second morning together, breakfast arrived nearly an hour late. The tea was cold. Half the dishes had been forgotten.
Must I do everything myself? We were waiting for instructions, my lady. Then use your common sense.
The servants hurried away. Tristram watched quietly. He had expected his wife to solve the problem. Instead, she blamed everyone around her. That afternoon, another misunderstanding delayed correspondence with his solicitor. Again, Isadora complained. Again, someone else fixed the mistake. Tristram found himself asking a question that refused to leave his thoughts. Who had truly managed Ashcroft Manor all these years? Meanwhile, at Ravenshire Estate, Duke Cyril stood beside the library window. The wedding remained fresh in his memory. Not the music, not the celebration, not the bride. He remembered only one woman walking calmly through humiliation without allowing bitterness to touch her dignity. He turned toward his elderly steward. "I need you to learn something for me." "Yes, Your Grace."
Tell me about Lady Lavinia Ashcroft. Yes, Your Grace.
The steward bowed and departed. He returned 2 days later, carrying several notes. His expression revealed genuine surprise. "Your Grace, what did you discover? The reports are remarkably consistent." He hesitated before continuing. "They all say the same thing. For the past 12 years, Lady Lavinia has managed nearly every part of Ashcroft Manor." Cyril remained silent. The steward continued. "Accounts, tenants, suppliers, servants, repairs, even household finances." He shook his head in disbelief. "I've never heard of a noblewoman carrying such responsibilities alone." Cyril looked toward the gardens beyond the window. Only one word escaped his lips: remarkable. Far from both great estates, Lavinia unpacked the few belongings she had carried away from Ashcroft Manor. An elderly widow had rented her a tiny stone cottage overlooking quiet fields. There were no servants, no bells, no ledgers waiting on a desk, no voices calling her name from every direction. The silence felt unfamiliar, almost frightening. That evening she sat beside the small fireplace, unsure what to do with the empty hours. For 12 years, every moment had belonged to someone else. Now they belonged to her. She did not know how to use them. Before dawn the next morning, habit woke her. She immediately sat upright, thinking about breakfast schedules, deliveries, medicines, and household accounts. Then she remembered. There was nothing waiting. No one needed her. She slowly lowered her head into her hands. For the first time since leaving Ashcroft Manor, she quietly cried. Just as she wiped away the last tear, a gentle knock echoed through the little cottage. Lavinia frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone. The elderly widow looked through the front window before turning back with a puzzled expression.
Outside.
My lady,
Gentleman?
there's a gentleman outside. He says his name is Duke Cyril Ravenshire. Lavinia stood quietly beside the cottage door, unsure whether the widow had corrected her.
Duke Cyril Ravenshire?
The elderly woman nodded. He has come alone, my lady. Lavinia took a slow breath before opening the door. The Duke stood a respectful distance away, dressed simply in a dark riding coat rather than formal court attire. His hat rested in his hands, and there was nothing imposing about the way he carried himself. The moment she appeared, he inclined his head. I hope you'll forgive this unexpected visit. Lavinia returned the gesture. Your Grace, I wasn't expecting anyone. I know. He offered a faint smile. That is why I nearly turned back twice. The unexpected honesty caught her off guard. I've not come to disturb your peace, he continued. I simply wish to thank you. She frowned slightly. Thank me. For reminding me that dignity still exists. Lavinia looked confused. I don't understand. I witnessed remarkable strength at the wedding. She immediately lowered her eyes. I'm afraid you witnessed a rather embarrassing family disagreement. I witnessed a woman treated unfairly. He paused. And a woman who answered cruelty without becoming cruel herself. Heat rose to Lavinia's face. She assumed he had come because he pitied her. There is no need to feel sorry for me, Your Grace. His expression softened. I assure you, I do not. I admire you. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Cyril stepped back. I've already taken too much of your morning. He placed a small parcel on the doorstep. It is simply tea from my estate. No obligation, no expectation, only gratitude. With another respectful bow, he departed. Lavinia remained standing in the doorway long after he disappeared along the village road. For the first time in many years, someone had seen her without asking anything in return. Over the following weeks, their paths crossed naturally. Sometimes Cyril visited the village school his late wife had once supported. Lavinia often volunteered there, helping children organize books or assisting the elderly teacher with correspondence. Their conversations began politely, but gradually became longer. On another occasion, they met while walking through the public gardens. They discussed the changing seasons rather than themselves. Another afternoon found them visiting elderly tenants whose cottages had suffered storm damage. Neither arrived expecting the other. They simply worked side by side until the repairs were finished. When rain interrupted one of their walks, Cyril invited her to the library at Ravenshire Estate. The vast collection reminded Lavinia of the university library she had once dreamed of visiting. She wandered silently between towering shelves.
I understand.
I had forgotten how comforting books can be, she admitted. Cyril smiled. They have rescued me many times. She selected a history volume. I used to believe I would spend my life surrounded by books. What changed? She closed the cover gently. Life. He understood without asking another question. Their friendship grew from shared silences more than grand conversations. Neither attempted to impress the other. Neither spoke of romance. Instead, they spoke about grief, about responsibilities that never seemed to end, about people they had loved and lost. Cyril spoke quietly of his late wife and the infant son who had lived only a few days. Lavinia listened without interruption. When she finally spoke about her own sacrifices, she never portrayed herself as a victim. "I simply did what I believed was necessary." Cyril looked at her thoughtfully. "And who has ever done what was necessary for you?" She had no answer. Away from Ashcroft Manor, life slowly became unfamiliar in the most comforting way. Lavinia planted flowers outside her tiny cottage. Watching the first green shoots emerge from the soil brought her unexpected happiness. She embroidered small cushions, not because anyone needed them, but because she enjoyed creating something beautiful. She borrowed novels from the village library and spent quiet evenings reading beside the fireplace. One evening she laughed aloud at a humorous passage. The sound startled her. Almost immediately, guilt settled over her heart. She closed the book. How could she laugh while her family faced difficulties? The feeling refused to leave her. She still believed happiness had to be earned through sacrifice. Back at Ashcroft Manor, the cracks continued widening. Without Lavinia's careful management, unpaid bills began accumulating. Suppliers who had trusted the estate for years now demanded immediate payment before delivering goods. Several experienced servants resigned, unwilling to work inside an increasingly disorganized household. Drusilla spent hours surrounded by account books she could barely understand. For the first time, she realized she had never learned how the estate actually functioned. Every problem she had once handed to Lavinia now returned to her own desk. Meanwhile, Amos drifted deeper into reckless habits. Casual gambling became a daily addiction. When his winnings disappeared, he borrowed money. When lenders refused him, he forged Lord Gideon's signature on several financial documents, convincing himself he would repay everything before anyone noticed. Not yet. Across the county, Isadora's marriage was already beginning to change. She expected servants to anticipate every request before she spoke. If breakfast arrived late, she blamed the staff. If correspondence was misplaced, she blamed the housekeeper. If flowers wilted, she blamed the gardener. She never considered solving the problem herself. Tristram watched quietly. The cheerful young woman he had fallen in love with seemed increasingly unwilling to accept responsibility for even the smallest inconvenience. He began wondering how much of her effortless life had actually been created by someone else. 3 weeks after the wedding, Ashcroft Manor's front gates opened to admit an unfamiliar carriage. 2 uniformed officers stepped onto the gravel driveway, carrying official documents. The butler greeted them nervously. The older officer removed his hat. "We are here for legal business." He looked toward the manor entrance. "We need to speak with Mr. Amos Ashcroft." The household fell silent. The arrival of the officers spread through Ashcroft Manor faster than wildfire. Servants gathered quietly along the corridors, whispering amongst themselves as the 2 uniformed men waited in the entrance hall. Amos descended the staircase with an irritated expression. "What is all this commotion?" The older officer unfolded an official document. "Mr. Amos Ashcroft, I am. You are under investigation for forgery, obtaining money under false pretenses, and failure to repay substantial debts." Amos laughed nervously. "There must be some mistake." "There is no mistake." The officer produced several papers. "These financial agreements carry Lord Gideon Ashcroft's signature." Amos glanced at the documents. His face lost all color. I can explain." Before another word could be spoken, Lord Gideon wheeled himself into the hall. "What is happening?" The officer respectfully bowed. "My lord, we regret bringing this matter to your home." He handed Gideon one of the contracts. Gideon stared at the signature. It looked almost identical to his own. Almost. Then he noticed the tiny differences. His heart sank. He slowly lifted his eyes toward his son. "Amos, you forged my name?" Amos swallowed hard. "I only intended to borrow the money until I won it back." "You gambled with our family's honor?" Silence answered him. The officer stepped forward. "Mr. Amos Ashcroft, you must come with us." Two servants watched in disbelief as Amos was escorted through the front doors. Neighbors paused outside the estate gates. Within minutes, word had begun spreading throughout the county. Lord Gideon remained motionless. He watched the carriage disappear into the distance, feeling older than he had ever felt before. Behind him, Drusilla's legs gave way beneath her. She collapsed into a nearby chair, burying her face in trembling hands. "My son! My son!" For the first time in years, no one looked toward the doorway expecting Lavinia to solve the crisis, because she was gone. That evening, Tristram returned to Ashcroft Manor after hearing the shocking news. He found Gideon alone in the library. The old nobleman stared silently into the dying fire. Tristram approached quietly. "My lord, I'm deeply sorry." Gideon looked up. His tired eyes carried years of regret. "Sit down, my boy." After a long silence, Gideon finally spoke. "For 12 years," Gideon's voice trembled, "my eldest daughter carried this family." He spoke slowly, almost as though confessing a crime. "When I lost the use of my legs, she gave up her education. She managed this estate. She negotiated with creditors. She organized every harvest. She kept servants employed. She watched every penny we possessed." His hands shook. "Every beautiful gown Isadora ever wore, every invitation she accepted, every comfortable season this family enjoyed was purchased with Lavinia's sacrifices." He paused before continuing. "And every debt Amos created, she quietly repaid before I ever discovered it." Tristram stared at him in stunned silence. He remembered the wedding. He remembered Lavinia working while everyone else celebrated. He remembered mistaking her for someone who simply preferred responsibility. Only now did he understand the truth. "My God!" Gideon lowered his head. "I allowed my daughter to disappear while everyone praised the lives she built for us. I failed her." The confession haunted Tristram long after he returned home. That evening, he sat with Isadora in their drawing room. "There is something your father told me today." Isadora barely looked up from the embroidery she had abandoned after only a few stitches. "What now?" "He told me everything Lavinia sacrificed." Isadora sighed impatiently. "I already know she helped the family." "No," Tristram's voice remained calm. "You don't understand. She gave up her future. She worked herself into exhaustion so everyone else could live comfortably." Isadora folded her arms. "No one forced her." Tristram frowned. "What?" "Lavinia chose that life." She spoke with complete certainty. "She always liked being responsible. If she truly wanted something different, she would have left years ago." The words settled heavily between them. Tristram looked at his wife as though seeing her for the first time. "Do you honestly believe that?" "I do." His disappointment remained hidden behind a quiet silence. Over the following weeks, he attended fewer social gatherings. Instead, he spent his afternoons helping Gideon organize legal documents and estate accounts. The work was unfamiliar, but someone had to do it. During one visit, he encountered Mrs. Eleanor Whittemore, a widowed family friend who had come to deliver homemade preserves for Gideon. She greeted everyone with kindness and offered practical advice about dealing with creditors. Nothing about their conversation was improper. They simply shared mutual respect. Yet when Isadora learned Mrs. Whittemore had visited while Tristram was there, suspicion immediately took root. "She seems very comfortable around my husband." Tristram looked at her in disbelief. "She is old enough to have been my aunt." "That doesn't answer my question." "There wasn't a question. There should be." He sighed deeply. "You're imagining problems that don't exist." But Isadora no longer believed him. Across the county, Duke Cyril found himself visiting the village more often than necessary. Sometimes he met Lavinia while delivering books to the school. Sometimes they spoke during walks through the gardens. Sometimes they simply shared tea while discussing history or music. One evening, as he rode home beneath the setting sun, he finally admitted something he had been avoiding. He no longer admired Lady Lavinia Ashcroft. Admiration had quietly become love. Not because she had suffered, not because she had sacrificed, but because every day she chose kindness when life had given her countless reasons to become bitter. He smiled faintly to himself, yet he said nothing. She had spent 12 years carrying burdens she never chose. The last thing he intended to do was place another expectation upon her heart. Meanwhile, inside a small apothecary shop in the neighboring town, Isadora pulled the hood of her cloak lower over her face. The elderly pharmacist approached politely. "How may I assist you, my lady?" She hesitated. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she asked for a bottle of poison. The old man looked at her carefully. His expression slowly changed. Without realizing it, Isadora had taken the first step towards destroying everything she still had left.
The poison remained hidden inside Isadora's dressing table for 3 days. Each morning she told herself she would throw it away. Each evening she convinced herself she still needed it. Her anger had become so consuming that she no longer blamed her own choices. She blamed everyone else. She blamed the servants who no longer respected her. She blamed Tristram for growing distant. Most of all, she blamed Mrs. Eleanor Whittemore, the widowed family friend whose quiet kindness toward Tristram had awakened a jealousy that existed only in Isadora's imagination. One afternoon, Mrs. Whittemore accepted an invitation for tea. The drawing room had been carefully prepared. Silver cups rested neatly upon the table. As the elderly widow stepped outside for a brief conversation with the housekeeper, Isadora quietly removed the small bottle from her sleeve. Her trembling fingers uncorked it. She reached toward Mrs. Whittemore's teacup. Then she stopped. The woman's gentle smile flashed through her mind. Mrs. Whittemore had never spoken an unkind word to her. She had done nothing deserving of death. Isadora slowly lowered her hand. For a single moment, her conscience almost won. Then another thought entered her mind. Everything had changed because of Tristram. If he had remained devoted only to her, none of this would have happened. Her shaking hand moved instead toward her husband's wineglass. She poured the poison inside. The liquid disappeared without leaving a trace. When everyone returned to the table, Tristram reached for the glass. Just before it touched his lips, the young footman serving nearby frowned. "My lord," Tristram looked up, "there appears to be something floating in your wine." He held the glass toward the light. A faint cloudy swirl drifted near the surface. Within minutes, the family physician had been summoned. After examining the drink, his expression became grave. "Do not let anyone consume this. It contains poison." The room fell into stunned silence. The authorities were called immediately. Questions became accusations. Accusations became evidence. When confronted with the bottle discovered inside her dressing table, Isadora finally broke. "I didn't mean—" Her words dissolved into panicked sobs. "I only wanted everything to stop." The officers stepped forward. She struggled against them. "You've all betrayed me." She looked desperately toward Tristram. "You made me do this." No one answered, not because they hated her, because there was nothing left to say. As the carriage carried her away from the estate, she continued screaming that everyone had abandoned her. The road swallowed her voice. Days later, news of Isadora's arrest reached the quiet village where Lavinia now lived. An elderly neighbor delivered the letter with gentle hesitation. Lavinia read every line in silence. When she finished, she folded the paper carefully and placed it on the table. Tears filled her eyes. Not because justice had finally caught up with her sister, not because the family that had wounded her was falling apart. She cried because another memory refused to leave her. A little girl running through sunny gardens, tiny arms wrapped around her waist, a cheerful voice calling, "Second Mama." She covered her face. What happened to us? The question lingered unanswered. That evening, Duke Cyril found her sitting beneath the flowering trees at the edge of the village gardens. He quietly sat beside her. Neither spoke for several minutes. Finally, Lavinia whispered, "I thought leaving would stop the pain." "It lessened it," Cyril replied gently, "but love rarely disappears simply because distance grows." She nodded.
I still wish things ended differently." "So do I." Silence settled comfortably between them. After a long while, Cyril turned toward her. "There is something I have wanted to say for many weeks." She looked at him. His expression carried neither nervousness nor urgency, only quiet certainty. "You spent 12 years building everyone else's happiness." His voice remained calm. "I would like to spend the rest of my life building yours." Lavinia's eyes filled with tears once more. She searched his face for pity. She found none, only honesty. She looked down at her hands. "What if—" Her voice almost disappeared. "What if I don't know how to be loved?" Cyril smiled with gentle warmth. "Then we'll learn together." A soft laugh escaped through her tears. For the first time in many years, the future no longer frightened her. She slowly placed her hand in his. Yes. The single word carried more hope than any promise she had made before. Several days later, another visitor arrived at the cottage, Lord Gideon. He insisted on coming alone. When Lavinia opened the door, she immediately saw how much older he looked. His eyes carried months of sleepless nights. He wheeled himself forward before suddenly gripping the armrests. With enormous effort, he tried to rise. "Father!" Before she could stop him, his weakened legs gave way. He fell heavily onto one knee beside his wheelchair. "Lavinia!" His voice broke. "Please forgive me. I failed you. I chose silence when I should have protected you." He struggled to kneel completely despite the pain. Instead of allowing him to continue, Lavinia immediately knelt beside him. She gently held his shoulders. "No." Tears streamed down both their faces. "Please don't carry this guilt any more. You gave me life. You loved me. We both made sacrifices. It is time we both stopped living inside the past." Gideon closed his eyes as years of shame finally began to lift from his heart. Father and daughter embraced quietly beneath the afternoon sun. Neither needed another apology. Neither needed another explanation. Forgiveness had already spoken for them. A few weeks later, the peaceful village echoed with the joyful sound of church bells. Once, those bells had celebrated a wedding Lavinia built for someone else. Now, they rang once again. This time, they rang for her. The wedding took place on a quiet spring morning. There were no endless rows of curious nobles hoping to witness scandal. No whispers, no grand display meant to impress strangers. Only family, close friends, loyal servants, and the people whose lives had been touched by kindness. The small chapel overflowed with peace rather than extravagance. Fresh white flowers decorated the altar. Sunlight poured through the stained glass windows, bathing the room in gentle colors. As Lavinia walked down the aisle, she wore an elegant ivory gown that reflected neither wealth nor pride, only grace. There was no fear in her eyes, no exhaustion, no invisible burden resting on her shoulders. For the first time since she was 17 years old, she walked towards a future that belonged entirely to her. Waiting beside the altar, Duke Cyril Ravenshire never looked away. When she finally reached him, he smiled with the same quiet warmth that had first welcomed her outside the little cottage months earlier. The ceremony was simple. Their vows were sincere. Neither promised perfection. Instead, they promised honesty, patience, and a home where neither of them would ever carry life's burdens alone again. When the minister declared them husband and wife, the chapel filled with heartfelt applause. Lady Lavinia Ashcroft became the Duchess of Ravenshire. Not because she had married a duke, but because she had finally found a place where she was valued simply for being herself. Several days after the wedding, an unexpected visitor arrived at Ravenshire Estate. Lady Drusilla stood outside the entrance, her confidence replaced by quiet uncertainty. Time had changed her. The proud woman who once believed she controlled every situation now struggled to meet Lavinia's eyes. "I came to apologize," she said softly. Lavinia welcomed her inside without hesitation. They sat together in the garden where spring flowers had begun to bloom. For a long time, neither woman spoke. Finally, Drusilla broke the silence. "When your father married me, I was afraid." Lavinia listened quietly. "I feared I could never replace the woman you had lost." Her voice trembled. "You weren't my daughter, and I allowed that fear to build a wall between us." Tears filled her eyes. Then something even worse happened. She lowered her head. "I became dependent on you. You solved every problem before I even noticed it. You carried every responsibility. I stopped seeing the burden." Her voice cracked. "And eventually, I forgot you were a daughter at all." Silence settled between them. Drusilla looked at Lavinia with genuine regret. "I cannot undo what I took from you. I only hope one day you'll remember me with a little less pain." Lavinia reached across the table and gently held her hand. "I forgive you." Drusilla looked up in surprise. "You do?" "I do." She smiled softly. "Not because the past can be changed, but because I refuse to carry bitterness into the life I've finally been given." Drusilla quietly wept. Several weeks later, Lavinia made another difficult journey. She visited the county prison. The heavy iron gates closed behind her as a guard escorted her into the visitors' room. Amos entered first. The confidence that once defined him had disappeared. "I thought I was clever," he admitted quietly. "I thought one more gamble would solve everything." He shook his head. "My greed destroyed all of us." Lavinia squeezed his hand. "I hope you become the man Father always believed you could be." A few moments later, Isadora entered. She looked smaller somehow. The pride that once ruled her every expression had vanished. For several long moments, she simply stared at her sister. Then tears slowly filled her eyes. "I finally understand," her voice barely carried across the room. "You loved me more than I ever loved you." Lavinia could no longer hold back her own tears. The sisters embraced through the narrow opening allowed by the guards. No anger remained between them, only sorrow. Lavinia forgave her, but forgiveness could not erase the choices that had already been made. Trust would need far longer to heal. Months passed peacefully at Ravenshire Estate. Under Lavinia's careful guidance, the estate flourished. Not because she worked herself into exhaustion, but because Cyril insisted every responsibility be shared. One afternoon, Lord Gideon arrived for a visit. From the terrace, he quietly watched Lavinia walking through the gardens beside her husband. She laughed freely at something Cyril had whispered. The sound drifted gently across the roses. Gideon remained perfectly still. For 12 long years, every memory of his daughter had been tied to sacrifice. She had always been carrying ledgers, always comforting someone, always solving another crisis, always giving away pieces of herself. Now she carried nothing. She simply walked beside the man she loved. She looked peaceful. She looked free. A smile slowly appeared on Gideon's face. He whispered to himself, "Now I can finally rest." Years later, the people of Ravenshire spoke of their duchess with deep affection. She transformed the estate through wisdom rather than pride. Workers received fair wages. Tenants found understanding instead of punishment. Families were treated with dignity. Most importantly, Lavinia established schools where young girls could receive the education she had once surrendered. She wanted every daughter to have opportunities no sacrifice could take away. One golden afternoon, she walked hand in hand with Cyril through the palace gardens. Flowers bloomed on each side. Birdsong filled the air. No one called her name to solve another emergency. No one placed impossible responsibilities into her hands. No one expected her to carry the weight of an entire family alone. For the first time since she was 17 years old, the future belonged to her. The end.